We are back, and we are joined now by Jason Koebler. Sorry for mispronouncing it a little bit earlier. Co-founder of 404 Media, previously the editor-in-chief of Motherboard, and also, if you go to our description below, 404 Media has a YouTube channel where you can check it out, youtube.com/@404 Media Co. Thanks so much, Jason, for coming on the show today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So, you wrote a piece about decentralizing big tech, and I want to get to that in just a bit, but I feel like I want to start with the TikTok ban because it's topical and because there's so many kind of moving parts in that story. I'm still, you wrote about this in your piece on this. Like, I don't understand why there's not more digging into the lobbying efforts by Meta on this TikTok ban to take out what could be, what's their largest competitor with Instagram completely, right? Like, what's the status of this ban, and what is your feeling about Meta's role in trying to get this over the finish line?
Right. I mean, TikTok's status in the United States is still very much up in the air. Trump has pushed the deadline to make a decision back. The law does provide a way for him to do that, but it's unclear whether it provides this specific way. But if you notice, like, TikTok is not in either app store, either the iOS or Google Play Store. Right now, Oracle is hosting TikTok servers for American users. That is actually an outgrowth of an earlier executive order that Trump pushed in his first term. And right now, it seems like TikTok is sort of just existing, hoping that there's not going to be enforcement from the Department of Justice, but that could change really at any moment. Senator Tom Cotton has said that he really is upset about Trump, kind of giving them this lifeline. And so I think that the fact that TikTok did go off for a few hours over the weekend was a really chilling thing that, as an American and as an American tech reporter, we haven't seen a lot of in the United States. These are the types of decisions that a lot of authoritarian governments take all over the world. But in the US, we're sort of used to being able to access the entire internet, if you will. And so I think it is a warning for TikTok users, and especially the people who make a living on those platforms.
Certainly. And you mentioned in your piece on this that Meta did, it seems like, paid a firm called Targeted Victory to say publicly about how TikTok is dangerous to children, right? So they at the very least tried to have that PR out there. But it is interesting in terms of, like, this ban. It was also the Israel lobby, we should be clear, was a big part of it as well. But the way that all of these tech oligarchs are kissing the ring with Trump and kissing his ass in this incredibly humiliating ritual where even Zuckerberg, it's like, I saw Matt Walsh saying, I don't believe this guy. They know what's going on here,
Sam
right?
Altman's turn of face.
Yeah, it's so brazen. But you just said Oracle and their servers. I want to play a little bit of this video of the founder of Oracle, co-founder Larry Ellison. Wait, that's his name, right? Yep. Gosh.
Yeah, Larry Ellison.
Yeah, I'm a little foggy here. Larry Ellison, because this is potentially one of the bidders that Donald Trump is setting up to buy TikTok. And, like, that could be, or at least have a stake in it, that could be extremely concerning based on things like this.
The police will be on their best behavior because we're constantly watching and recording everything that's going on. Citizens will be on their best behavior because we're constantly recording and reporting everything that's going on. And it's unimpeachable. The cars have cameras on them. I think we have a squad car here someplace. But those kind of applications using AI, if we can use AI, and we're using AI to monitor the video. So if that altercation that occurred in Memphis, the chief of police would be immediately notified. It's not people that are looking at those cameras, it's AI that's looking at the camera. No, you can't do this. It would be like a shooting. That's going to be an event that's immediately, an alarm is going to go off. It's going to be, and we're going to have supervision. In other words, every police officer is going to be supervised at all times. And the supervision will, and if there's a problem, AI will report the problem and report it to the appropriate person, whether it's the sheriff or the chief or whomever we need to take control of the situation. We have,
I think that's good. You get the sense that is him saying that AI and constant surveillance is going to make sure that we're a safer place, and it's going to keep everybody in line. That is almost, taking a page right out of George Orwell's playbook and just making it reality.
This is already a reality in a lot of places in the United States. We've done a lot of reporting about this company called Fusus, which sells smart surveillance cameras that essentially allow police to tap into a large network of surveillance cameras at convenience stores, but also surveillance cameras that they themselves own. And it has things like object recognition. We've seen automated license plate readers proliferate all over the United States. And so, this future is very scary, but it's also one that's already here to some degree. And I think that when we talk about TikTok and a TikTok ban and worries about China spying on us, many, many American tech companies are violating our privacy all day, every day.
Right.
And there has been very little action by Congress to take any sort of to make any sort of protections for American citizens. I think you brought up Mark Zuckerberg and Meta. Meta was obviously the biggest potential beneficiary of a TikTok ban because the sort of natural place to go is Reels. We saw Meta sort of roll out a lot of features to entice TikTok users to go over to Instagram. But when Congress has hauled Mark Zuckerberg in front of different panels over the years to talk about privacy violations and anti-competitive behavior and monopolistic behavior, Mark Zuckerberg has beat the drum that Chinese tech companies are the ones to fear, and and competition from Chinese tech companies sort of could put America's standing as the leader on the internet at risk. And I think that Meta has said that it has not directly lobbied on a TikTok ban, but Meta is the one that would benefit the most. And Zuckerberg has used China as this cudgel to prevent regulation of his own platforms for years.
And for a guy like Ellison getting in on this, somebody who is heavily invested in surveillance technology and is involved in contracts at the U.S.-Mexico border and other government contracts that we may not even know of, can you speak to what that would mean to have yet another social media behemoth controlled by a Trump sycophant and a right-wing ideologue, essentially? Because now Twitter, now Meta, all of our social, and the Google CEO owns YouTube, was genuflecting at the altar of Donald Trump at the inauguration the other day, as was the TikTok CEO. So right. Even in these situations, we're basically seeing a complete conservative capture of our social media sites. And they raised hell about what they called censorship. It wasn't the case. But now it's resulted in them kind of winning this fight, which is scary for the rest of us.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you talk about what if Larry Ellison or, there was reporting that maybe Chinese government wanted Elon Musk to buy TikTok, or maybe they would be open to that. I think TikTok is already more beholden to the Trump administration than anyone could possibly be, because they owe their entire existence in the United States, their status in the United States, to Trump looking the other way on what is already a law. And so, I mean, I do agree that it would be bad if one of Trump's friends in Larry Ellison took full control of TikTok in the United States. But we have TikTok throwing inauguration parties for Donald Trump. We have them thanking him, for saving TikTok on the app in a, push alert to millions and millions of users. And I think that at this point, I think that their status is a little bit different than, say, Mark Zuckerberg and Meta's status, because Mark Zuckerberg aligning himself with MAGA is more, cynical and perhaps like genuflecting, whereas TikTok sees it as like an existential risk, because at this point they exist in the United States because Trump happens to like them at this exact moment. And so you're absolutely right. Every major social media company now feels beholden to the Trump administration in some way. Some of them are controlled by people who are literally part of the government at this point. You know, Doge is now formally a part of the government. You have Elon Musk, who is hopping around on stage with Donald Trump. And then you also have, you know, obviously Mark Zuckerberg's sort of heel turn. So it's a big concern.
Yeah, and I guess I'm wondering what, as somebody who studies this and knows more about big tech certainly than myself, from the outside, it really does feel to me like over the past few years, Meta, other tech companies, Google, right, even Google less so perhaps, but Meta in particular, they've reached basically the end point in terms of services that they can provide for people, right? I mean, they were under an antitrust investigation for allegedly, now that's probably going to be dropped because Lena Khan is gone, but purchasing Instagram and WhatsApp 10, 15 years ago at inflated prices, higher than their market value in order to crush competition. But now basically there are these giant companies that have to try to grow in some way. Endless growth is the goal under capitalism, even though it's impossible. And I feel like they've bumped up against a practical reality of what they can provide other than just selling people's data. And so this Zuckerberg heel turn really feels like a way for him to protect this kind of giant pile of money that he has within Meta, but without, I guess, expanding the company in any practical way. He's going to have to rely on essentially buying off the government in order to maintain tech status and Meta's status in the world and in its size.
Yeah, I mean, Mark Zuckerberg had one great invention in Facebook many years ago, and all of the like innovation that company has done since has been either ripping off its competitors and not facing any consequences, or buying its competitors and not facing any consequences. The metaverse was lighting money on fire. It didn't work. And
Right.
now, you know, Meta is shoving artificial intelligence into all of its products, like many other tech giants are as well. And I think that's sort of where I think protecting the platforms that he has by cozying up to the Trump administration, and then also trying to extract as much value from artificial intelligence and artificial intelligence slop and spam that's taken over these platforms, is Meta's strategy at this point. I watched a recent shareholder meeting, and Mark Zuckerberg was talking about how they imagine a future where there's artificial intelligent bots and accounts sort of like, well, interacting with people. I mean, you can argue about whether that's social media at all. I would argue that it's not.
Anti-social media?
Yeah. But one thing that Meta has rolled out that I think has been underreported, and that is really interesting to me, is that they're allowing advertisers to use generative AI to make a bunch of different variations of the advertisements that they are creating. And so advertisers used to, maybe make 3 or 4 different versions of an ad, target them at different audiences on the platform, and then put money behind the one that was performing the best. Well, now Meta is allowing you to, instead of test 3 or 4 or 5 different types of ads, you can test dozens and dozens and dozens of slight variations of ads and target them even more closely. And that has actually led to advertisers spending a lot more money on Meta platforms. And so I think where he sees growth is just sort of like shoving artificial intelligence down people's throats, whether they like it or not, keeping us in an endless scroll, and creating more and more content that is hyper targeted at people's interests that they can charge higher ad rates for. Whether that is an exciting thing for users or just sort of something that will benefit Meta's bottom line, I mean, you can probably tell where I stand on that.
Right. And I guess the question is there a fear that there is going to be another tech bubble and a crash that comes with it? And because as I said in my previous kind of question to you, is just like, what else? There's way too much wealth concentrated here for the amount of value that is being provided to people.
Yeah, I mean, there's a race right now. The entire industry is focused on artificial intelligence and a race to create, either a singularity or, I think more likely, just find a use case for artificial intelligence that people really like, that is profitable. Because right now, generative AI costs a lot to run. The data centers the compute is really, really expensive. And even products like ChatGPT that are used by millions and millions of people are like wildly unprofitable. And so, I mean, I do think that there's a big bubble right now. I think that the question is whether they'll be able to drive the cost of artificial intelligence down and find a use case for it before that money runs out.
So to turn to kind of your piece on how we can resist and create alternatives to the tech oligarchy, you write about decentralizing social media. Can you talk a little bit about that and explain what that vision might look like for people that want to build alternatives in this moment?
Yeah, so I mean, 10 years ago, you could choose to be on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube, and Twitter, and that was kind of your only choice. At this point, there are technologies that are, user controlled, decentralized to some extent. You have things like the Fediverse, which runs on, Mastodon, which runs on a protocol called ActivityPub, and then you have Blue Sky, which is pretty centralized at the moment, but runs on a protocol called the AT protocol, which is going to allow for decentralization in the future. And what that means is that, let's say, Blue Sky takes a terrible Nazi-like turn at some point. I'm not saying it will happen, but let's say that you build a following on Blue Sky and you decide, I don't want to be here anymore. You can take your following list, you can take, all of the followers that you've accumulated on that platform, and you can port it over to another server. And that server will remain interoperable with all of the people that you've sort of accumulated over time. This technology already exists, and it allows for a lot of user control, and it also allows for a lot of sort of hardening against government censorship, government shutdowns, things like that. The decentralized internet with things like torrents have been around for a really long time, but what people have built on Mastodon is very resilient, is very cool, and most importantly, is not owned by billionaires, is not controlled by billionaires. It is, you can kind of choose your own adventure algorithm wise, and it's not based on, surveillance capitalism, more or less. What I do say in the piece is that until very recently, joining these social networks has been a little bit difficult. And especially on Mastodon, there has not been a huge user base. And I think part of social media, part of Instagram, part of TikTok is that everyone is there. And like, as Elon Musk has made Twitter and X really bad, there was a mass exodus to Blue Sky. And if you're posting on Blue Sky now, it's like there's tons of people there. There's, you can follow people who are posting about anything you could possibly want. And I think the key to surviving this tech oligarchy is making these platforms easier to join, and also just getting people to use them. I think also things like making a TikTok alternative on an AT protocol or on ActivityPub is a really good idea, and something that hopefully will happen. Making an Instagram alternative,
although you wrote about how
yeah.
Meta was blocking links to that Instagram alternative. So it's difficult, I think, for people to even imagine branching out. But as you write, the right wing, like, online media ecosystem, 4chan, I mean, these are really deep far right kind of corners of the internet. But it's not like they have a massive user base. They built it up over time, and it ended up having a lot of political influence. It's basically kind of the base of Donald Trump's support. It's the Gamergate outgrowth.
Yeah, I mean, there was this idea in the aftermath of the 2016 election and during the 2016 election to some extent that you could ban Nazis and ban far right people, and they would get deplatformed and they would go somewhere else and they would have a lot less influence. I think it was the correct call to, ban white supremacists and terrorists and things like that. But what they did was they went and built their own platforms. Things like Rumble, Gab, Truth Social, Odyssey, Patriots.win, which is a Reddit alternative. And it's not that there are tons of people on these platforms necessarily. And I'm not saying that they're specifically Nazi platforms or far right platforms. You choose your experience may vary on these platforms, but what they have been successful at is serving as like a base of ideas that then filtered up into right-wing politics, into places like Fox News, and really like their ideology is mainstream ideology in the United States with the election of Donald Trump. And the left hasn't really had that, hasn't really had these spaces that are,
well,
yeah.
The right subsidizes it too. That's the other thing where I think it's just hard somewhat to draw full equivalence, because the right, not all of the platforms that you describe, but Rumble is a Cantor Fitzgerald corporation project. We know that right-wing media is subsidized. We don't have full transparency on this, but like, what do you make of that power imbalance and financial imbalance?
Yeah, it's not a perfect analogy by any stretch, but I do think that these platforms have been successful at filtering their ideas up into the mainstream. And part of that is because of the funding that you said. Right-wing media is also much better funded than left-wing media. And the mainstream media that people, love to hate on for many, many reasons is far more centrist than one would hope if you were trying to build political power in this country. So it's a very difficult situation, but I do think that decentralizing social media it's just a powerful tool to use against these platforms that are now fully aligned with the Trump administration and are, either going to put their thumb on the scale behind the scenes, or in the case of something like X, like in a very public way. And so I think it is important for people to build a following on platforms that can't be controlled as easily.
Absolutely. Well, Jason, really appreciate your time today. Jason Koebler, co-founder of 404 Media. Check out their YouTube channel, check out their website. All the articles that I referenced, we'll link to that below wherever you're listening to or watching this. Appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Hey folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.